Good morning, Cowboys Nation, and welcome back to another episode of the Writer's Block podcast. I am your host, David Howman, joined as always by my incredible co-host, Brandon Clements, wearing, for those of you watching on YouTube, wearing some Syracuse gear for this episode. If you haven't caught on by now, this guy is a big Syracuse fan. Brandon, how are you doing? How are you feeling with everything going on in Cowboys land and the Super Bowl coming up?
I'm excited. I'm excited for the future of the Dallas Cowboys. Like all these new hires. Like I feel like Shotty and company are building a really good staff, which I know we're going to get into that in a little bit. A lot of dominoes have fallen since we last recorded, and yeah, I'm excited. And as here's the thing, as everybody knows, anyone that listens to us or has listened to any of my work over the years, I'm like the ever most of the time I'm like the ever optimistic person like of the group. So like I'm excited. I'm draft season's around the corner. We got the Senior Bowl just happened. We had the Shrine game as well. So there's a lot of fun stuff going on. And then we got this other game called the Super Bowl that's coming up this weekend. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm not a fan of either team. Obviously, we're a Cowboys podcast, but there's no way and like there's no possibility for me to ever root for the Philadelphia Eagles in anything. As much as I don't like the Chiefs, because the Chiefs are what the Patriots were, not that long ago with Tom Brady. But I would have to turn in my fan card if I said, yeah, I'm going to go root for the other guys. That's not happening. That if we were doing this, we wouldn't be doing this podcast anymore because it would be all over. It'd be done. So, I got to roll with the Chiefs this weekend. Maybe we'll get an impromptu Taylor Swift appearance at the halftime show. Who knows what's going to happen because we all know she's going to be there. Kendrick Lamar is going to be doing his thing. So I'm looking forward to commercials and different things. So, to me, I don't care about the two teams in it. I just don't want Philadelphia to win.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much how I feel. I think that's how all of Cowboys Nation feels at this point is just as long as the Eagles don't win. And yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily hate the Chiefs. I don't have as much Chiefs fatigue as everybody else seems to have at this point, but on some level, it is kind of annoying that they keep winning because it's like, well, why can't we just do that? Like every other team is watching them like, well, why can't we, however many straight years that they've been to the AFC Championship game, they're on the verge of becoming the first team to ever win the Super Bowl 3 straight years, which would be, honestly, that would be a really cool thing to actually witness and be able to say, I remember the first team to ever do that. But also, yeah, I mean, like you said, the Chiefs, they are what the Patriots were, in the Brady era. And it's just, we all exist at a point where we went from like the Brady Patriots era of dominance every year to the Mahomes Chiefs era of dominance. And, it's like, well, what are we supposed to do? We know who it's going to be.
Yeah, so, and the Cowboys just exist in the ecosystem. Like they're just another team at this point.
Yeah.
And the thing is too, I don't know if you've seen some of the media pundits out there, but if there's some different media pundits that are saying that if Mahomes and the Chiefs win this weekend, he's greater than Tom Brady. I don't know how you feel about that.
I think he's already greater than him. I mean, all due respect to Tom Brady, but Tom Brady cannot do the things that Patrick Mahomes does.
No, Tom Brady was in a league of his own. That's why he's the GOAT. I mean, here's the thing. Growing up in Central New York, there's a huge Bills population. So obviously, like, not too many people in this town like Tom Brady because the Patriots kicked the crap out of the Bills for like 20 years. But to me, like, this is gonna sound crazy, but like, I've always liked Tom Brady, except when he plays the Cowboys, and like
I know you love him as a broadcaster.
You're
one of like 5 people that love him as a broadcaster, but
here's the thing though, like he might get a lot of hate, and here's the thing too with Tom, I think he's gotten better as the years gone on. That's my opinion, of course, but I think a lot of people just want to see him fail because he dominated the NFL for so long, and like he was just despised because he was so much better than everybody else. And he's successful in everything he does. And it's like, you want to see this. So I feel like, I'm not saying you, but there are people out there that I feel like, especially in the New York media, I feel like they just want to see him fail because because Tom Brady kicked the crap out of them for 2 decades. So I'm not saying he's the greatest broadcaster of all time, but I will say he has gotten better. And it's not like he went to a professional broadcasting school like we have here at the Harvard of Central New York and Syracuse. But I think he's getting better, and I'm excited to see what the future holds for him as a broadcaster. I still like Tony Romo, and him and Jim Nantz do a hell of a job as well. So, I that's the thing with the whole, when I hear these media pundits trying to say Mahomes is better than Tom Brady, let's pump the brakes on that, because Tom's still got more rings than everybody else. I'm just saying.
Well, he's played longer at this point than Mahomes has, so of course he's going to have more rings. But
Well, nobody.
Tom
Here's
never,
the thing:
Tom never
Mahomes ain't going to
three-peated.
play that long. Mahomes ain't going to play like as long as Tom Brady. I highly doubt it.
No, but he'll probably finish with as many or more rings at this point.
Well, you know what? I'll be devil's advocate maybe here, and I'll just say not unless I think Schotty and the Cowboys are coming. That's all I'm saying.
Well, and to your point, talking about Schotty, Brian Schottenheimer, the new Cowboys head coach. Last time that we were on here talking, it was right after he had officially been introduced. Of course, Matt Eberflus and Nick Sorensen had been hired as a defensive coordinator, special teams coordinator, respectively. And at this point, Schotty's mostly filled out his staff. And I got to say, the vibes have gotten noticeably better around the Schotty hire since then. His press conference, as we talked about last week, was really impressive. And anybody who knows Schotty knew that was going to happen. He's a really compelling person when you hear him speak. But he's pretty close to filling out his staff at this point. He recently, I think over the weekend, officially hired Cardinals offensive line coach Clayton Adams as his offensive coordinator. That was a hire that, looking around Cowboys Twitter and everything, that gained a lot of goodwill with fans. People already really liked Matt Eberflus. Obviously, he didn't work out as a head coach, but his track record as a defensive coordinator has always been strong. And, now people are saying, like, hey, Schotty's he's kind of built a sneaky good coaching staff.
Yes.
Clayton Adams, of course, was the offensive line coach for the Cardinals the last 2 years. He played a heavy hand in designing arguably the most diverse run game in the NFL the last 2 years. The Cardinals were, I believe, second in the NFL in running counter, a running concept. The Cowboys were one of the worst teams in terms of how often they use counter. They had a very diverse play set when it comes to the run game. No other team used pulling guards more than the Cardinals have the last 2 years, whereas the Cowboys for the last a very long time, I don't exactly know how many years, but spanning multiple coaching staffs, have been heavily dependent on inside and outside zone, very vanilla in terms of their run schemes. So there was a lot of excitement there. Brian Schottenheimer's already talked about, we want to beef up our run game. Obviously, Schotty is calling the plays, but Clayton Adams coming on as the offensive coordinator and essentially being the guy that's going to be in charge of innovating this run scheme with guys like Tyler Smith, Cooper Beebe. You even talk about Tyler Guyton, of whether he's left tackle or right tackle, getting those guys on the move, getting those guys pulling, and having some explosive run plays from a guy who has helped devise one of the most explosive run games in the NFL the last 2 years. That earned a lot of goodwill for Brian Schottenheimer, not only from Cowboys fans, but just from around the league, people who really laughed at hiring Brian Schottenheimer as head coach. And now they're like, well, Matt Eberflus is a darn good defensive coordinator, and Clayton Adams, I mean, he's not calling the plays, so it's not like this is going to be his offense, but he brings a lot of creativity to your run scheme. Whereas, and Brian Schottenheimer obviously has a lot of experience calling plays. Are you as excited about Clayton Adams as everybody else seems to be? You already said you're like always the positive one, so I'm anticipating you're going to say yes, but feel free to prove me wrong.
I mean, and I'm going to say this, I guess, maybe tongue in cheek a little bit. So that means Ashton Genty's the pick at 12, right? At this point, I mean, we're investing so much in this run, this run game. I think it's the perfect time to go. I know you don't like it. I know you're not a fan of first round running backs, but correct. I mean, what better time to do it than pick 12? I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs, for the Lions, right in that area right there, has worked out pretty well. I mean, Clayton Adams and Brian Schottenheimer are two great minds, especially in the running game. Like their play designs are great. I think you're going to see I think you're going to see multiple tight ends on the field all the time, or very often, because that's kind of like that's what I've seen from Clayton Adams. At least that's my understanding of Clayton Adams. Because I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I don't watch a lot of Cardinals games, but just once he was hired, I wanted to jump into the tape and kind of read up on things and just see find out more about him, because I know you were you were just talking about him in recent episodes, so I know you've been pretty high on him. And I went and did some research and just kind of watched different clips that I saw surfing the web, and yeah, I mean, he's a hell of a run designer. And I think the getting the blockers in space, that's going to be cool as well. Like I think this guy paired up with Brian Schottenheimer, who we've talked about already, being a really good run game coach. I'm excited for it. I just I want to see how things are going to develop with the pass, which Shotty already said, and we talked about it last week. The plan is it's easy. Well, it's easier said than done, I should say. You run the ball really well. You set up the play action and throw a bomb to, say, CeeDee Lamb or Jake Ferguson down the seam, something like that. Like it sounds really exciting, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this develops. But I still need a running back as the coach from Draft Day. I know his real name, Dennis Leary, but I can't think of his name in the movie. But the coach in Draft Day, I still need a running back. So if you can have all these great run scheme, run design, but you got to get me a running back that can do it. I don't think Rico's coming back. That's just something we've talked about before. I think that ship has sailed. You could also invest in maybe a trade market. I've seen some different running backs out there. I believe I saw different interest levels of like Kendry Miller with the Saints, like somebody like that. Obviously Damian Pierce is somebody we've talked about before, who's playing in state in Texas. Maybe you bring a guy like that in, via trade, and you get me a running back in the draft. I think, obviously Deuce Vaughn will be here as well. And I'm excited to see what they'll do with Deuce, because I feel like they could use him in ways that maybe we haven't seen yet. And yeah. when Deuce has played, I've seen flashes of what he did at Kansas State. And it reminded me a little bit of that great, I think it was an 87-yard run against Alabama, just a few years ago, before, in his final season at Kansas State. Like, he has the ability. It's just we got to figure out how to make it work. And if he can't make it work with Shotty and Clayton Adams, then Deuce might be looking for maybe joining the staff as a coach or something, because
they might have to cut Deuce loose, you could say.
Yeah, that's exactly. But overall, I'm excited about it. I mean, Shotty's doing some good work here, building a good staff. I know there's some other positions we'll talk about later, which, there's a couple different names out there that, I would like to see at certain roles, which we'll get to. One of them does have head coaching experience. So again, Shotty's never been a head coach, but if you can bring somebody in with some head coaching experience, I think that never hurts.
First things first, you're wrong about drafting a running back. It's still a terrible idea. Well, and you mentioned Rico, and I mean, we both agree. I would be shocked if Rico comes back to the Cowboys at this point. I mean, you can't rule it out, but I would be shocked if he does. But again, like, we're talking about this as like, yeah, it's going to suck to lose Rico Dowdle. A year ago, we were having conversations on here about like, there's no way you can have Rico Dowdle being your RB1. Like, you can't have this guy. Like, he's nobody. And then he goes in and has 1,000-yard rushing season. And now we're talking about, man, I really wish we could keep him. So like, how do you say, oh, Rico Dowdle went from a 0 to a hero, and now we want him back, to, okay, we got to use the 12th overall pick on Ashton Genty, especially when the guy that's now running your run game with all these creative run schemes is coming from the Cardinals, where like James Conner was their bell cow. And I'm not going to sit here and curse the name of James Conner, but you look at the money he's being paid, it's not top of the market. You look at where he was drafted, it wasn't in the first round. Like, this is James Conner has been a very good running back for a very long time. And he's got a really incredible story of, just in his life. Big fan of James Conner. I in no way mean this as an insult, but he is not on the level of like a Derrick Henry or a Saquon Barkley, or even, in terms of like the Cardinals did not invest in James Conner what the Cowboys would be investing if they drafted Ashton Genty in the first round. So I say all that to say, no, it doesn't mean that. I don't think Clayton Adams means you're going Ashton Genty. I think if anything, this is a guy who his scheme is built around using the offensive line to make it easier on the run game, regardless of who your running back is. And I'm just going to draw a couple of coaching tree ties for a quick second. So Clayton Adams, for a while, was coaching with the Colts, first as an assistant offensive line coach, then as the tight ends coach. He was there for almost the entirety of the Frank Reich era. Running backs that they had that were successful, there was Marlon Mack, Nyheim Hines, and then Jonathan Taylor when he was still on his rookie contract. None of those guys were first-round picks. None of those guys, until Taylor got his big money, which I think was after I believe that was after Adams had already left. It might have been his last year where he got paid. None of those guys were highly paid guys. They were all very productive players. And then also looking at the Cardinals right now, their offensive coordinator, who actually does call plays, name of Drew Petzing. He came from Cleveland. Before that, he had been in Minnesota. He had been coaching alongside Browns head coach Kevin Stefanski for a very long time. They were very much joined at the hip. And Stefanski is a guy whose offense, he very much comes from that Gary Kubiak, Kyle Shanahan tree of offense, but he's also utilized a lot more gap scheme blocking in his run game, something that Petzing took with him, something that Adams has kind of mastered in Arizona. And I mean, you look at the Browns and they've had a really great running back by the name of Nick Chubb, who was a second-round pick. They've had, Kareem Hunt has come in and out here and there. He was not a high draft pick, and even when the Browns brought him in, they were not paying a ton of money for him. Dearness Johnson, Jerome Ford, like they have had really successful running backs in that scheme that they have not really invested in. Nick Chubb is being paid fairly well, but it's also not top of market at this point. So I look at the philosophical influences on Clayton Adams, where he comes from, and then Drew Petzing, his most recent offensive coordinator, where he comes from. And I look at this and I'm like, this is a scheme that's kind of built to, like, the scheme makes the running back. And you're going to want to, I think they would invest more in their offensive line before they do their running back, though I'm not necessarily sure that they're going to invest in either of those in the first round, just because they probably have bigger needs elsewhere.
Hey, I'll take on day 2. I'll take LaQuinn Allen at Syracuse.
I'll take Cam Scatterbo on day 2.
I know you will. I know we got a couple of our guys, which I know we'll get to it a little bit later. But I say tongue in cheek with it because, I really like Ashton Genty, but I can't disagree with you on the thinking, so to speak, because there's I would say everybody should get a running back in this class. It's so deep. I feel like
it's so deep. I mean, I did a mock draft today late in the 5th round. Granted, these are mock drafts, it's a mock draft in February too. But you've got Taj Brooks from Texas Tech, you've got Ollie Gordon from Oklahoma State, and Jordan James from Oregon, all in the 5th round. And I mean, one of those guys is probably going to go higher than that in reality. Yeah. But those are 3 superstar players. This is a deep class. To take Ashton Genty, he may be running back 1 in this class, far and away. But the gap between RB1 and RB12 is not what it is between say, wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 12, for instance.
No, I'm with you on that. I mean, I would love Genty on the team. Obviously, who wouldn't want this guy? Yeah, he would be a lot of fun. And here's the thing: if the Cowboys do pick him at 12, I'm going to be happy about it. I know you won't be, but I'll be happy about it because I like the player, and sometimes you just got to go with the best player on your board, and we don't know what the board looks like for the Cowboys, as they're obviously still building that because there's a lot of things good that have to happen between now and the draft. Obviously, we had the Senior Bowl, the East-West Shrine Game, which gives you some good intel. But you obviously have the combine and pro days and things like that. Like that, those are going to be tall tale signs. I mean, I got to watch a little bit of the East-West Shrine. I got to watch a little bit of the Senior Bowl. I was very happy because I got to see some guys rocking the orange that we normally don't get to see because just hasn't been very deep deep at so to speak for NFL. We do get a few guys here and there, but it's just a testament for me watching Fran Brown just develop these guys, and we got to see some really good standouts, and overall I wouldn't, and I've seen some mocks. I saw a mock from one of our good friends, Paul Stewart, over at one of our Blogging the Boys brothers, so to speak. He actually he had Kyle McCord in one of those. I was hammering the drum, and I'm like, and he got him in like the 5th round. I was like, I don't think he's gonna last in the 5th round, to be honest. But if he's sitting there around 5 and the Cowboys take him, I'm gonna be stoked about that because Kyle McCord. Here's the thing, Kyle McCord is somebody 1st or 2nd round. I wouldn't be surprised. I'm just saying.
I would be. But to go back though, because I don't want to fight with you about Kyle McCord. We got months to do that.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
A name you mentioned though of a running back target, Kendre Miller, plays for the Saints. Yeah. His running backs coach this last year, Derek Foster, just got hired as the running backs coach in Dallas, which is another guy that they rounded out their staff with. Foster also, before this last year in New Orleans, was the running backs coach for several years with the Chargers. Austin Eckler had statistically some of the best years of his career with Foster in charge. Prior to that, Foster had a long college coaching career. He was at Iowa when Tyler Goodson was a player there. Tyler Goodson went on to have a really sensational college career at Iowa under Foster's guidance. So that's somebody that has a really good track record, good pedigree. They also just hired former Rutgers standout Tequan Underwood as their assistant wide receivers coach. He spent this past year as the assistant wide receivers coach for the Patriots. And of course, they overhauled their coaching staff. Underwood, he's somebody that I came up on my radar a few months ago when we were talking about who we want as the next Cowboys head coach. And I was very much on the Brian Flores train. And it's funny how Underwood came onto my radar there is, well, first of all, he was part of Brian Flores' initial staff with the Dolphins. But also, he was the wide receivers coach and the pass game coordinator at the University of Pittsburgh, the one year where Flores was a senior defensive assistant for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And there's an article out there on ESPN about how Flores, because they share the same facility. So Flores and Underwood, they had a connection. And through that connection, he ended up getting meetings with the Pittsburgh head coach, Pat Narduzzi, and they were all exchanging a bunch of ideas. And that was a key part of Brian Flores, kind of revamping his defensive scheme into what we now see that he's dominating the NFL, every single Sunday with the Vikings. So Underwood kind of popped up on my radar. I knew, his coaching career, had already begun up to that point, but it was like, okay, here's a guy who, was kind of instrumental in helping one of the best defensive coordinators in the NFL over the last 2 years, reinvent his own scheme. That's a pretty cool thing to put on your hat. And then also you're, an assistant wide receivers coach. So I think that's a really cool addition. They also hired David Overstreet II to be their cornerbacks coach. He has a history working under Matt Eberflus as well. So looks like the defensive staff is probably pretty close to being complete. The Cowboys still need a quarterbacks coach. They need a wide receivers coach that Tequan Underwood will assist. They need an offensive line coach. They did agree to terms with tight ends coach Lunda Wells to bring him back, but I don't think it's actually been confirmed whether or not he's going to coach tight ends or if he's going to move to offensive line, which he's assisted with in the past. Dan Quinn did request to interview him for offensive line coach last year, and the Cowboys blocked him. So he could be offensive line. He could stick with tight ends. That hasn't really been confirmed yet. But by and large, this coaching staff is coming into place. And like we just mentioned, there's a couple of open positions still. They need an assistant special teams coordinator to help out Nick Sorensen as well. Are there any names that come to mind that you're if we get this guy on staff, like I'll be really, really pumped.
Well, I'll give you a name, and it's not a realistic name because he's never leaving this particular school, and it's Brian Hartline. That,
Okay.
like that, Brian Hartline for receiver coach, like that would be something I'd be stoked about. It's not happening. Like I had to put it on my list because he was a good quality player in the NFL. And I think he's next in line for Ohio State's head coaching job. I know a few Ohio State fans, and that's who they want as their head coach, and they're very fickle as a fan base, as I found out. So I mean that's kind of how they roll. But no, I mean, realistically speaking, there's one name in particular, and it all depends. If London Wells stays at tight ends coach, fantastic. I'm good with that. But if he goes to O line, Jason Witten would be my tight ends coach. There's some moving parts there. But let's just say London Wells sticks at the tight ends, tight end coach, and he's done a really good job with it. I mean, look what he's done. Look what he's done with Jake Ferguson, for example. Like Jake Ferguson's been a very good pro since he came in the league as a 4th-round pick, not that long ago. But the name that I was kind of alluding to earlier, who has NFL head coaching experience, is the former Titans coach from about 10, 12 years ago, Mike Munchak. That's a guy. He was I mean, I don't. Would he come here? I don't know. I don't know what would happen there. But he was a great player. He was a 1st-round pick out of Penn State. Had to get a Penn State guy in there. My wife's a big Penn State fan, but he's a well-respected coach. He was a well-respected player. He was I believe on the All-Decade team back in the 80s. He's a great mind, and he's a hell of a. I think he'd be a hell of an addition to the coaching staff. Now, you did mention, because there's a couple more I wanted to mention. There's one more in particular that I would like to see, and it's because you mentioned the Patriots earlier. And to me, here's the name: Matthew Slater. Why not bring Matthew Slater in as an assistant special teams coach? To me, my understanding is Mike Vrabel, which I kind of find this funny, by the way, because if I'm not mistaken, I maybe I have my wires crossed a little bit, but I think Vrabel and Slater played together for the Patriots, if I'm not mistaken. I feel like they had to, because
Probably.
Vrabel was there for a long time, Slater was there for a long time, so I
Slater's
feel like
been
they
there
had to.
forever.
That's what I mean. So I'm like, why wouldn't you bring him back? Slater, to me, for the longest time, when he was in the league for the Patriots, he was that special teams ace. He was like CJ Goodwin, but like times 10. Like he was like CJ Goodwin's a good player, don't get me wrong, but Matthew Slater, like I put him on like the Steve Tasker like special teams list. Like he's a Hall of Fame worthy special teamer. That's how good he was. And to bring that mindset to this coaching staff would be sick. And here's the thing: as an assistant to Sorensen, like that would be really cool. Like I just saw that Slater's probably not coming back with Vrabel is what I was reading. So I was like, when I'm going through my list of coaches, I'm like, man, I mean, why not him? And actually, I got one more. I lied. I do have one more real quick. I mean, I have a few more, but I'll leave. I'll just put one on the list, and it's for the QB coach position. And for me, I feel like a guy like Ken Dorsey would be an ideal fit. I mean, people forget he helped Cam Newton with one of his best passing seasons when he was in Carolina. Like
Yeah.
people forget that. And then he worked with Josh Allen. Obviously Josh Allen's done pretty well in his career, and Dorsey worked his way on the staff. I believe as QB coach for a little bit, and then OC with the Bills. So to bring him in as a QB coach, I mean, Ken Dorsey to me would be a really good addition. He played in the league. He had a storied career at the University of Miami as a Hurricane. I mean, why not? I think that would be a really good choice.
Yeah, Ken Dorsey, you stole it from me because that's who I was going to say. So congrats on that. Of course, it was before they officially hired Clayton Adams as their offensive coordinator. It was also put out there that they had interest in interviewing Dorsey. I don't think that an interview ever formally happened, but that's the kind of where the name got thrown out in connection with the Cowboys. Like you mentioned, he was the QB coach in Carolina. And the Panthers, when Cam Newton was there, they had a pretty darn good run game too. If we're talking about Klayton Adams, Brian Schottenheimer wanting, good run game influences. And then in Buffalo, they also had a pretty darn good run game. Two mobile quarterbacks. Obviously, Dak Prescott is not the same type of Cam Newton, Josh Allen mobility type, but he can still move. And so, and I tweeted this out back when Ken Dorsey's name was first floated in connection with the Cowboys. A lot of people, like the narrative when they fired him midway through last season was that like the offense just immediately got so much better once Joe Brady took over. When you go back and you look at the numbers, statistically, it got slightly worse. Like the Bills offense was doing very good in a lot of different key categories. And then they fired Ken Dorsey, and then it continued to do really good. It was technically slightly less efficient, but not by a huge margin. The only real thing that changed from Ken Dorsey to Joe Brady during that year was Josh Allen stopped committing so many just like mind-numbing turnovers, which I feel like, and a lot of people in Buffalo at the time felt like the move was done largely to knock some sense into Josh Allen of, hey, like you being so reckless with the ball has consequences. And Ken Dorsey ended up being the scapegoat. Now, he was the offensive coordinator in Cleveland this last year, and the Browns offense was very, very bad, to put it lightly. Yeah. But for starters, Ken Dorsey did not start the season calling the plays. He took over calling plays from Kevin Stefanski, who we already talked about later in the season. And you look at the quarterbacks he's working there, right? Deshaun Watson, we all know, is horrible at this point, both as a person and as a player. And then the guys that he was working with after Deshaun Watson went down with an injury, Jameis Winston is a super fun guy, but he's still Jameis Winston. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, I forget who their quarterback was that they went to in week 18. But I mean, look at the roster that he was working with when he was calling plays, and again, not in his offense. Anybody who points to his time in Cleveland and says he's a bad play caller, like that doesn't mean anything to me. What I do like about Ken Dorsey is you look through all of his time as a play caller, his experience working in Carolina as a QB coach. His offenses have always had a heavy dose of RPO usage, a heavy dose of like spread concepts as well. So I think you bring him in as a QB coach, maybe pass game coordinator, to get some of those ideas built into your playbook. So you've got, the run scheme versatility of Clayton Adams. You've got kind of that spread and shred stuff from Ken Dorsey. And then, Brian Schottenheimer there, putting it all into, wrapping it into one coherent offense. I think that's a pretty darn good brain trust there. And then you mentioned Mike Munchak, who, in my estimation, if he were to start coaching today again, he'd be the best offensive line coach in the NFL. He has been an incredible offensive line coach for a very long time. Now, that being said, he did work as a consultant with the Rams this past offseason. Did a little bit of work in season, but not super like formal. In recent years, it's been said that he's interested in getting back into coaching, but it just would need to be the right opportunity. I don't know if Dallas is that opportunity, especially since he'd be working under another offensive line coach in Clayton Adams, who has a different approach. But some names that I threw out on Tuesday that I'd be interested in include Sean Sarrett, currently the assistant offensive line coach with the Vikings, who prior to that was the assistant under Mike Munchak in Pittsburgh. So he comes from that same field. And then I also think if they were to stick on to Mike Solari, their current offensive line coach, I wouldn't hate that. I know there's a lot of people that really hate Mike Solari. You look at the numbers, each of the last 2 years, they've been in the top 10 in best pressure rate allowed. So I'm like, I don't really understand the hate. Like Tyler Smith became an all-pro under Mike Solari. Cooper Beebe had a really great rookie year under Mike Solari. We saw both TJ Bass and Brock Hoffman take huge steps forward under him. And if you do keep him, like obviously Solari knows Brian Schottenheimer well. He coached alongside Marty Schottenheimer. He coached under Brian Schottenheimer for 3 years in Seattle, has been working alongside him the last 2 years in Dallas. Like these guys know each other. And also like keeping him, there's the familiarity with the head coach, but also Clayton Adams is the one that's really going to be doing a lot of the run scheme designs. So it's not like whoever your offensive line coach is, they're not going to be having the same level of responsibility that a traditional offensive line coach would be. So I'd be okay if they kept Mike Solari, but it does sound like they're really, casting a wide net for all of these position coaches, not just offensive line. So really, that's what I want more than anything, is just to take a serious approach to building this staff and look at a bunch of different options. Don't just fill it up with guys you worked with before, guys that you know, guys that are your buddies. Like really go out there and find somebody that is going to be the right fit for you. And speaking of the process of hiring coaches, of course, pivoting back to the Cowboys' own decision to hire Brian Schottenheimer. I put out an article this past Friday on Blogging the Boys that you can find with exclusive reporting about the Cowboys' interest in Pete Carroll, who, of course, decided to become the Raiders head coach. Essentially, the gist of it was Pete Carroll reached out to Jerry Jones, was interested in the Cowboys vacancy. They kind of discussed some preliminary stuff over the phone, which it took about like a week and a half for that phone call to actually like get reported. But then they kind of had their conversations. Jerry talked with Brian Schottenheimer, and of course he had back-to-back interviews with him. And they also discussed Pete Carroll in that interview, and there was a lot of buzz that Jerry Jones was essentially considering. He was picking between make Schotty my head coach or bring in Pete Carroll and keep Schotty as my offensive coordinator, and kind of was deciding between those two options. And at the same time, the Raiders were ready to make an offer to Pete Carroll because Ben Johnson took the Bears job, and the Raiders were heavily invested in Ben Johnson, but Pete Carroll was their backup. Once the Lions lost in the playoffs, that domino fell. And suddenly it was like, oh, well, now the Raiders, they know their decision. They're going with Pete Carroll. And Pete still had not at that point had an interview with Jerry Jones with the Cowboys. And essentially the gist that I got from these sources was Jerry really was kind of slow playing things, and Pete was like, all right, I'm going to take the Raiders job. And the day after Pete Carroll was announced with the actually, I think it was technically the same day because he was announced to the Raiders Friday morning, and then Friday night is when Brian Schottenheimer was announced. So in a sense, it almost feels like that decision was made for him because Jerry moved so slowly in all of this. Since then, Pete Carroll has gone on to retain Patrick Graham as his defensive coordinator, who's done a tremendous job with that defense the last few years. And then talking about guys leaving Ohio State, you mentioned Brian Hartline, but Chip Kelly just left as their offensive coordinator to become Pete Carroll's offensive coordinator with the Raiders, which, now you've got, thinking back to like the glory days of the Pac-10 football, you've got Chip Kelly, Pete Carroll, Jim Harbaugh, all in the same division. But does this news make you like upset, like annoyed? I think we both are feeling a lot of positivity around Brian Schottenheimer, but this ultimately comes back on like the process, the way that Jerry went about, doing these things and making these decisions, and the way that he kind of slow played things, kind of made some decisions for him rather than him being the one in control.
Well, here's the problem. Jerry Jones just slow plays everything, whether it's, free agency, you name it. Like I feel like he, being in his 80s now, like he's one of those, like, I just feel like things are slower with him. I just feel like he's not like, I'm not trying to, say anything bad, like, cognitively and things like that. I'm not trying to go down that rabbit hole by any means, but it seems like he's slow on the draw when it comes to anything. And I'm not mad at that things played out the way they did, because honestly, for the Raiders, Pete Carroll is almost like a bridge to the future of whoever the next coach is going to be, because it's not going to be Pete Carroll's not going to be there 15 years. Like, let's be honest. Like Pete was Pete is okay with taking a short-term deal, and he just wants to coach, and
Right.
and maybe install the culture, and then have the heir apparent, developed over the next year or 2 or 3 years, and then the Raiders go in that direction. I think the Cowboys. I would say I'd actually, if I was Jerry Jones, I'd send the Raiders, a bottle of scotch, or whatever, whatever Mr. Davis's favorite cocktail, if he drinks. I don't know, maybe do something for him. Just say, hey, thanks for forcing my hand. I think I picked the right choice. I mean, I think I made the right choice, but thank you for forcing my hand to make the right choice, because Shotty's young when it comes to coaching terms anyways. Like, he's been doing it a long time, but he's in his early 50s, which, let's be honest, as we can see, we were talking about Pete Carroll. I mean, Pete Carroll's old enough to be Shotty's dad. Like, that's like that. Let's be honest. Like, that's a real thing. So, I mean, Schottenheimer, I think Shotty could be here for a long time. I hope he is, because if he is, that means the Cowboys are very successful. Things are running well. So, yeah, I mean, if this was Pete Carroll, maybe when Jason Garrett was around, I'd be more excited. But this is a guy who's going to, what is he, the oldest coach in the league now? Like,
Yeah.
I think that if that, I believe that's the fact. But I like, cool. I mean, I'm happy for Pete. Like, I've always thought he was a heck of a coach, whether it was in his days at USC, his obviously his days with the Seahawks, and in the Legion of Boom. But I'm okay. It all worked out for me personally at this stage. I don't know what's going to happen with Shotty yet. Obviously, like, we haven't seen what he can do as a head coach yet. So, I mean, it's kind of a TBD. But at this stage, we're recording here in February of 2025, and we haven't seen Shotty coach a game yet. I'm okay, because we've talked about it already. He's building a heck of a coaching staff, and I think we needed some fresh blood that also has the familiarity of being not only with the Cowboys, but knowing how to deal with the Joneses. So I think it all worked out. Thanks to Mark Davis, for forcing Jerry to do what he had to do, which was the right decision, anyways.
Yeah. Well, I think really more than anything, it's thanks to the Lions just, getting beat in the playoffs.
That is true too.
Because everybody expected that at the very least, the Lions were going to go to the conference championship game just as they were last year, which means any team that hires Ben Johnson is going to have to wait. And of course, Ben Johnson, he took the Bears job, but the Raiders were heavily interested. The Jaguars were heavily interested. So it's like neither of those teams is going to make a move until they know for sure, until they make Ben Johnson say, I don't want you. So if the Lions do go to the conference championship game, that buys you at least another week before Ben Johnson makes his decision. Maybe at that point, with that extra time, maybe the Cowboys then say, okay, Pete, let's bring you in for an interview. And maybe he wows them with the interview. And they're like, all right, we got to get this guy because we can have him and Shotty. So really it ultimately I think a lot of it came down to, the Lions getting eliminated changed everything, because suddenly Ben Johnson was available. Suddenly he took the Bears job. Suddenly the Raiders were like, well, it's not Ben Johnson. Our next option is Pete Carroll. And then Jerry just, he wasn't really moving quick enough for what Carroll wanted for his timeline.
Here's what I'll say too, to add to that. Even if it's an extra week or two, Jerry moves so dang slow these days anyways. That might have not made a difference anyways, 1 to 2 weeks. We're never going to know, because everything has already happened, this and that. Here's kind of a joking question, I guess, for you, because we obviously are talking about Pete Carroll. So does Pete Carroll chew gum during his interviews? Like, is that a thing?
Well, he didn't for the Raiders interview. I can tell you that much. But it is funny though, because he came in, and of course he's had a lot of really successful coaches under him, including Brian Schottenheimer. But Robert Saleh got started on his career path under Pete Carroll. Dan Quinn, of course, got started under him. Chris Richard, who he was a rising star at one point, didn't quite work out in the end, but there's been a lot of guys.
Gus Bradley too, right?
Gus Bradley got the Jaguars head coaching job. Yeah. So when you think about like Pete Carroll and saying like, if we can hire you and then have somebody grooming to be like your heir apparent, there's not a whole lot of coaches out there I'd rather have being in that grooming role than Pete Carroll. Whether it's Jason Witten, whether it's Brian Schottenheimer, whether it's Linda Wells, whoever it is, like
Yeah.
Pete Carroll is a phenomenal culture setter. He's a phenomenal program builder, and he's known as a defensive guru, but he's also done a lot of work with the offense, which Schottenheimer interestingly noted in his introductory press conference with the Cowboys, was saying like Pete Carroll challenged me a lot on my scheme and helped me develop a lot of my philosophies and ideas that I'm going to use going forward with the Cowboys. So I think it'll be interesting to kind of monitor these two teams. Obviously, Pete Carroll is stepping into a worse situation right now with the Raiders than the Cowboys are because
they have the worst quarterback situation in the league. They have the worst quarterback situation in the league by far.
Yeah. So it's not. I think Cowboys probably end up with a better record this year than the Raiders. But long term, like what Pete Carroll's able to do with the Raiders, if things don't work out with Shoddy, I think we'll look back on this and say, what could have been? What could have been if Jerry had just been a little bit more aggressive. And we'll have to see. But of course, like you said, doesn't really matter at this point. The decisions have been made. Shoddy's the coach, and he's building a heck of a staff. And of course, the next question is, who are they going to draft? Who's going to be their non-running back that they're going to get in the draft? And of course, you already alluded to this. The Senior Bowl and the Shrine Bowl have happened. Those are kind of the first official events of draft season. Who were a couple of guys that like really stood out to you that you were like, man, I hope the Cowboys get this guy?
Well, let's be honest here. I mean, it's Syracuse guys. Let's be honest. Let's see. I think there was LaQuint Allen was at the Senior Bowl, and I've alluded to him. He showed up. Like Jordan Reed from ESPN put a nice piece out about him, and I did have to retweet it, of course, on social media because Jordan Reed is one of those guys. To me, I think he's better than Mel Kiper. Like that's just my opinion. I think Jordan Reed is a star in the recruiting in the mock draft world and the scouting realm. He's really in tune. And I just when Jordan Reed puts it out there, it's like, see, it's like I told you guys all along how good this guy was. Aronde Gadsden was I believe he was in the Shrine. I get him mixed up because there's been so many the last these two games, but Aronde Gadsden's been somebody that he's showed up. I think Aronde Gadsden, I don't think he's a fit for Dallas because we already have Fergie. Unless Aronde falls to a point where it's like, and it won't be a fourth because we don't have one. It'd have to be in the fifth because I think Aronde is going to probably go. If I had to say as of today, I could see him going anywhere from like rounds 2 through 4, honestly, because that's how good he is. Like he also has that DNA from his dad. His dad was in the NFL, played for the Dolphins, cup of coffee with the Cowboys. So like, he has that lineage, but I think he's a better athlete than his dad, to be honest with you. And it's not, to me, it's more so not the player, but the position. I think we're okay at tight end. But LaQuint Allen.
Fergie, you've also got Luke Schoonmaker. They like Brevin Spanford. So it's
and don't forget, we got John Stevens Jr. in the pipeline as well. And he's had some injury issues, but you never know what could happen with him as well. That's another name to keep an eye on. I'm looking, just looking through my, my list here. You mentioned Brooks from Texas Tech. I think he's obviously a good player. Kobe Bryant from Kansas, cornerback. He has a great name. Maybe he has that Mamba mentality as the late great Kobe Bryant, the basketball legend
with a chip on his shoulder too.
And I like that. I like a guy like that. And then a guy that I'm familiar with because he terrorized my Syracuse Orange special teams is Ricky White III from UNLV. He terrorized. I think he had 2 block punts in that game against Syracuse. So I won't forget that guy anytime soon. But he's also a really good player, a good receiver. Like he's
a heck of a receiver.
Yeah, he was good on offense, but he's such a good player and such a team player that he's like, put me on special teams. and he absolutely crushed it against my Syracuse Orange. So that's a guy that I had written down for like the last couple months because he's a really good player. And I mean, we could also talk edge players as well, like a Landon Jackson. Like that's somebody that's really good. Actually, and I think it was senior. I think it was Senior Bowl. I got all these different names in my head because I was watching them both.
Yeah.
Jack Beck from TCU. I mean,
he had a heck of a week. Yeah.
What a story for him. Obviously, obviously, it happened about was it a month ago in New Orleans. He lost his brother, so obviously, thoughts and prayers obviously continued to all those involved, and in particular, Jack's brother. I mean, Princeton standout. I just love the fact that he caught the game. It was the game-winning play with 1 second left. How cool
like a
is that?
walk-off score. That's awesome.
And I like the emotions. And here's the thing too. Like I equate it to because this is going to be out of left field, but you're in that part of the country where they do it more so than where I live, which is New York.
I have no idea where this is going.
This is going to be interesting, folks. So stay tuned here. So it's bull. Like think of it as bull riding. Like think of it this way. So there was a legendary bull rider, Lane Frost, who was actually he lived in Oklahoma. So like he was a famous bull rider many years ago. He tragically lost his life, when he was riding a bull and the whole thing. You guys can go look it up. But his best friend won the world championship by riding not only 8 seconds, but he rode for 16 seconds. And people were saying he's riding for Lane, essentially. So like, what Jack Beck could be doing is he could be playing, like he's going to be playing for his brother as well. Like he's always going to have that extra juice for his brother. And as someone like myself who's lost a brother, like lost my brother, you carry them with you everywhere you go. So that's a guy, not only because he went to TCU, which is right down the road, so to speak. I wouldn't mind having him on the Cowboys. Great story, heck of a player. I mean, that's I'm just glad things on the field, happened the way it did, and he got to win the game. So I mean, we could always use a receiver too. So
yeah, he had a great week of practice. Obviously, like you mentioned, he put it together in the game. Would be very happy if he were having a star on his helmet. Two guys that really stuck out the most to me. Two guys that I was really excited to watch coming in. Two guys that I think really stood out. And I'm so happy you didn't steal either of them because you mentioned edge players, and I was like, this guy's gonna do it again. He's gonna steal my guy.
You're taking the Marshall guy, aren't you?
No, Mike Green. Mike Green from Marshall did have a great week. I do like Mike Green.
Stud.
I'll shout him out because he was great. Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M, though. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Shamar Stewart. He's listed as an edge. Some people think he should move inside and play defensive tackle. He's kind of a tweener there. I think he's listed at like around 290 pounds. But if you think about the Matt Eberflus defense, the number one thing that he needs is a great 3 technique defensive tackle. I think the Cowboys already have that in Osa Odighizuwa. Yeah. I think probably that they're going to work out a contract extension with Osa. I would imagine that Matt Eberflus in his interview was like, when they got to the, how every interview gets to the part where the employer is like, do you have any questions for us? And his one question was like, when are you going to sign Osa Odighizuwa to the contract extension? Not are you, but when? Because I'm not taking this job if he's not there. I would imagine. I don't know for sure that's how the conversation went, but he seems like such a great fit. But another thing that Matt Eberflus really needs is, because of the way that his defense is aligned, because of the 3 technique and how much everything is kind of based around his alignment, he also needs on the opposite end a defensive end with a lot of size, with a lot of strength that they can set the edge. Shamar Stewart gives you that. And he was, coming into this was probably like a fringe first-round guy. Now I think he's a lock for a first-round pick. Probably would be justified going there at 12. Potentially the Cowboys could even explore trading back a few spots, gaining some extra picks, maybe a 4th rounder, and still getting a guy like Shamar Stewart, which I would love. And then another guy sticking with the defensive line, but going more interior. Darius Alexander out of Toledo. I've been taking this guy in mock drafts since Dak Prescott went down, which is about when I started doing mock drafts. And I love watching this guy. I love the way he plays. He had another great week of practice. And now at this point, first few mock drafts I did, I was like, this Darius Alexander guy's, he's pretty fun. And he's always available in the 5th round. He's not making it to the 5th round at this point. He may not. He may rise even so far as to be early 2nd round at this rate. Could even sneak into the 1st round. We've seen crazier things. But he's another guy that I really, really like.
Well, we can't take him in the 4th round. So can't take him in the 4th round.
Unless you trade back to get Shamar Stewart, which I love. You love taking a running back in the 1st round. I love trading back in the 1st round. They did it last year, and they got that pick that they used on Cooper Beebe, and they still got Tyler Guyton, who they probably would have taken if they had stayed put anyway. I love trading back. But those were 2 guys that really stood out to me. 2 guys that I think if the Cowboys were able to get these guys, it's really gonna beef up their defensive line in some way. And speaking of beefing up the defensive line, the name that everyone is now talking about is Myles Garrett, the Browns' star pass rusher, who a couple days ago publicly announced on Twitter that he has requested a trade from the Browns. At the same time, the same day, Cooper Kupp announced on Twitter that the Rams informed him they were going to trade him, that they were going to seek to trade him. Of course, the Rams, it was reported they were trying to trade him at the trade deadline this past year. They were looking for a couple of 2nd rounders in exchange. No team took the bite on that. Now it looks like they're going to try and trade Kupp again. They did say, Cooper Kupp said that the Rams told him that he was going to have some level of input on where he wanted to go. But Cooper Kupp, Myles Garrett, both kind of sort of on the trade block. The Browns have not said that they will trade him. He's just requested a trade. So kind of a different situation there. But of course, anytime that any player is ever on the trade block, the very first team that gets connected is the Cowboys. And, Myles Garrett, he's from Texas. He's spoken before about how he would love to play for the Cowboys someday. Cooper Kupp doesn't really have those kind of ties, but he's a receiver. And as you said, they can always use a receiver. And he's also a pretty darn good receiver. Do either of these guys get your trade juices flowing?
I mean, obviously I would take them both. Let's be honest here. I mean, they're both really good football players. I mean, Myles Garrett, I think he just turned 29. Cooper Kupp, 31. He'll be 32 when the games are played this year. So I mean, he's. I mean, I feel like, and we were talking before the show, of the 2, Cooper Kupp would be the guy, because the Cowboys are known to take guys that they're not what they used to be, but they could, Brandon Cooks. We saw what he did there with the 5th round picks. I mean, obviously we don't have a 4th rounder. I don't think the Cowboys would give up a 3rd for Cooper Kupp, to be honest. I feel like they would have to package. Maybe they have to package. I mean, you're going to hate me saying this, but I'm just going to say it anyways. Hey, what the heck? Give him a 2026 4th rounder and a 5th rounder this year or something. I'm just spitballing here. I don't know what's really going to happen here, but I mean,
it's going to be how the Rams gave up their 1st rounder for the next 13 years to build that Super Bowl. That's what the Cowboys are going to do, but with 4th round picks.
4th round picks. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, and they're going to get the Temu version of that Rams Super Bowl team.
Which, I mean, it is on brand for the Joneses, but neither here nor there. But I mean, Cooper Kupp would be a cool addition. I mean, I would take him in a heartbeat. It would just we talked off air in our pre-show where the Rams are known to eat some money on their side, so that's what it would have to take, because the Cowboys are not going to take all of Cooper's contract. That's just not happening. So of the 2, I think Cooper Kupp is the more realistic, because I think if Myles Garrett is involved, the Browns are going to ask for Micah, and that's just not happening. Micah Parsons is not going anywhere. I love Myles Garrett.
At least CeeDee Lamb or Dak Prescott, somebody that's not movable.
Yeah, exactly. And here's the thing, as much as I think I think highly of Myles Garrett as a player. Like he's one of the greatest edge rushers we've ever seen. Do you package your future for a guy who's going to be 30 at the end of next season?
No.
I don't know how I feel about that. And there's that money thing again, because the Joneses are so great with money. They would have to figure out they'd have to make the Browns like eat contract money, and I just don't think they would do any of that because they're tied into Deshaun Watson, all that. And they just it's the Cleveland Browns. They're a mess anyways. But and that's why do you think Myles Garrett wants to get out? They're a mess. He wants out of there.
Right.
But I mean, you never know. Jerry Jones, if he's listening, which he should be, he should go make a splash and get one of these guys. I think Cooper Kupp would be a really good pairing with CeeDee Lamb. I would think that. I think that'd be fun. I think Dak would like that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it would be very similar to the Brandon Cooks trade. Probably not in compensation, but in I guess vibes. Going out and getting a veteran who historically has been a legitimate like star receiver who's not a star receiver at this point. But you don't need a star receiver at this point. You have a guy like that in CeeDee Lamb. Cooper Kupp could be a heck of a second option, similar to when they brought in Brandon Cooks. And I think the money could very well work. His base salary for next year, I think, is supposed to be around $12.5 million. That's feasible. If the Rams are willing to eat some of that guaranteed money, that's feasible. It very well could work out financially, and also because he's got the age, because he's got the injuries, because the trade market really wasn't there last time he was on the market. That's like, he sounds like he's a Cowboy already. Like this is somebody that he would have sold a ton of jerseys 2 years ago, and the Cowboys love those guys. Again, all due respect to Cooper Kupp, I'm advocating for it. I think it would be a great signing. Not Cooper Kupp's not making this team a Super Bowl contender.
Well, his production has gone down in the last 3 years. Like he had that monster year back in 2021 where he hit almost 2,000 yards.
Right.
And then I'm just looking at the numbers here. I mean, he's gone down every year. He went 812 yards in 2022. 2023 was 737 total receiving yards, and then last year was 710. Now again, all those seasons have one thing in common: they were shortened seasons for him because he was hurt. So I mean, he's still I think he's a good number 2 at this stage. And you know what? Like honestly, he's still a threat. Where CeeDee Lamb gets double covered, Cooper Kupp's going to win one-on-ones more often than not, and I think it'd be a good thing.
Yeah, and even if he's not winning every single time, like the name alone forces respect from defenses. Like you're not gonna, if you're doubling CeeDee Lamb, you're not gonna not cover Cooper Kupp, right?
Exactly.
So that adds another element. And to your point about Jerry Jones, he very well may be listening. And there was one takeaway from that press conference from the things that he was saying is he is very much online. He is reading the things that people are saying about him. So, Jerry, if you are listening, thank you. We appreciate you tuning into the Writer's Block.
By the way, you can send that large Jones check over to our Writer's Block, our Venmo page. We haven't done that yet, but we'll set that up. But
we'll set that up
seriously though.
Jerry.
Yeah, Jerry, just set it up for us, bud. We'll, you could throw us a few bucks. But I mean, Jerry, all jokes aside, like either one of these guys would be fun. Myles Garrett obviously would be the bigger name and the bigger play, but there's a lot more that would have to be done to make it happen. So if the Cowboys can work something out where Cooper Kupp is a Cowboy next year, I'm happy about it. Dak's going to be happy about it. I'm sure Shotty and the crew will be happy about it. So, I mean, I'm pushing for it. I'm putting my chips on the table and saying, Jerry, make this move.
And I will co-sign that. That brings us to our final point of business for this episode. Of course, this is our last episode before the Super Bowl, before the NFL season is officially over, even though it ended several months ago for the Cowboys.
Yeah.
But we've got Super Bowl predictions. We've already talked about, obviously, we're not rooting for the Eagles. We're reluctantly rooting for the Chiefs. But do you think that you're going to be on the winning side? Do you think the Chiefs are winning, and do you have any like special fun predictions on the side?
Yeah, I'm gonna say the Chiefs are going to beat the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm gonna give it a score as well. I think it's gonna be, I don't know why, but I think it's going to be like a 31-27 kind of game. I think that's kind of it's going to be close because I just feel like it's and I jokingly say this because of the refs. No, but all jokes aside, they're obviously in the Super Bowl for a reason. They're the final two teams, they're the two best teams facing off, and it's going to be it's painful for me to watch because and for us, I should say, for all of us at Cowboys Nation, because it's the Eagles are involved, and I begrudgingly have to root for the Chiefs just because it's the Eagles. So yeah, I think it's going to be 31-27. I think I'm going to give you a really interesting prediction that maybe you'll like. Travis Kelce proposes to Taylor Swift after he at the end of the Super Bowl after they win. There you go.
Okay, that is very specific.
I did it for you, man, because I know you're a Swiftie.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I agree the Chiefs win. I think they're going to win big, though. I think we're going to get something like 38-17. And here's why. You referenced the referee thing, this conspiracy about the refs helping them. The Chiefs have been asked about this. Like, the Chiefs players have been asked about this like 2,500 times in the last week. Sure. And I mean, they're all sick of it at this point.
Yeah.
And like, for the record, it's all BS. Like the idea that the refs are single-handedly colluding to help the Chiefs win, to help the most talented quarterback in the NFL, arguably the best coach in the NFL.
Howman, you didn't get the script?
It's probably sitting in my mailbox.
Okay, I made sure I sent it to you.
Yeah,
it's a long haul from Central New York to Oklahoma.
Right, but no, really though, I think the Chiefs are just. I think they're over it. I think they're upset. It's just giving them like extra you don't need extra motivation. It's the Super Bowl, but they're going to come out there and hair's going to be on fire. I think Chris Jones is going to get like 3 sacks, something like that. Defense is going to make Jalen Hurts look bad. I mean, which isn't a surprise. The Chiefs have one of the best defenses in the entire NFL. I think
Jalen's going to feel it, so it's going to be hurts. It's going to hurt a lot.
He's going to hurt a lot, yeah. And Kellen Moore is going to have a really, really bad showing as the offensive coordinator right before he goes and takes the Saints job, which by all accounts, he's going to take that Saints job.
Man, we timed that well because we were hyping up Mike McCarthy, and then the news breaks that Kellen Moore's the favorite.
And like an hour after we finished recording, it breaks that he's no longer he's waiting until next year. Yep. So now they're going with Kellen Moore, which pretty much guarantees that the Eagles are going to have a bad offensive performance, and then Saints fans are going to be like, "Oh, let's not hire him after all." But so that's what I think is going to happen in the Super Bowl. I think the Chiefs are just going to come out there. They're going to leave no doubt. They're going to be the first team to ever three-peat. Thankful for the Cowboys that, they don't have to see another Super Bowl for the Eagles. And also, I mean, the Chiefs started out in Dallas. So in a way, this counts. This counts for us. It doesn't really count in the record books, but it counts in our hearts, which is what really matters. Our hearts where we love Dallas. We hate Philly. And I mean, what better way to end the show than on that note? So, of course, next week will be the first official week of the off season. We'll be getting into high gear in draft season, and free agency and more trade rumors and all this fun stuff. So be sure to come back to the writer's block as we hopefully are reveling in an Eagles embarrassment at the highest level. For Brandon Clements, I'm David Howman. Until next week, how about them Cowboys?